This all began when I moved to Manchester, Connecticut back in 2005. I had just gotten a new job and had to move from New Hampshire. The move was probably the textbook definition of a lateral shift. The new house wasn't any better, wasn't any worse, it was just different. The living room was the same size, only it was on the eastern side of the house instead of the western. The toilet seat was colder, but the flush was quieter. I put the cat box in the sunroom instead of the mudroom. The neighbors kept to themselves just as much as the ones back from NH, but let me tell you, I had absolutely no problem with that. The only significant difference between the two places was that my new house was located at the end of a long driveway on the outskirts of town, in one of the least developed areas of Manchester. The closest neighbors were barely visible behind all the trees. At first, this was proving to be the single most unremarkable move in the history of the human race, at least at first. The longer I stayed in that house, the more peculiarities I began to notice. The first one that comes to mind immediately is that my cat Louise stopped going outside. At the old house, she used to spend pretty much all day outside, even during the winter. But when I went to let her out after moving to Connecticut, she just stuck her nose out, took a few sniffs, and trotted back over to the couch. After that, she never so much as went near the door again. That first thing really isn't all that unusual if you think about it. Cats oftentimes don't do well with big changes like moving houses. It oftentimes leads to changes in behavior. But it was just the first in a series of strange things. A few weeks in, I noticed that my trash bin had been knocked over. Trash scattered on the ground all around it. The first immediate culprit that comes to mind is raccoons. But this was a big trash bin with a heavy lid. It's one thing to believe that a group of raccoons might have been able to tip it over, but it doesn't really explain the huge dent in the lid. Doing research, I found that it's not unheard of for black bears to wander through these parts of Manchester. It was a little scary, but also kind of cool to think that a bear had paid me a visit in the night. At first, I didn't think I'd ever seen a bear, and I didn't, but I knew that it was sticking around somewhere nearby because there were always signs of it somewhere in the yard. The bird bath would be knocked over with all of the water gone. There'd be large scratches in the dirt patch by the shed or the oak tree in the side yard. A couple of times, it even left behind a few mostly eaten fish skeletons, as well as certain other presents for me to step in. But though there were signs of this bear all over my yard, I never once got a good look at the bear. I even tried to stay up and get a photo of him, but it seems I always had bad luck in any nights I picked. Getting even more curious, I decided to ask some neighbors if they knew anything about it. The responses I got were, we'll call it mixed. One woman I managed to catch while we were taking out our trash. I asked her if she knew if there were any bears in the area. She just looked at me confused, and then denied having seen any bears. But when I told her about all the stuff going on around my house, she nodded with a small smile and said she saw something like that in her yard too, but she'd never seen a bear. Most people I asked gave pretty much the same answer, with one major exception. There was one particularly cantankerous old bastard who I dreaded asking. When I told him all that I knew, he just glared at me for a solid moment and snarled out, "There ain't no bears around here." So things just sort of stayed this way for a few months. I moved into the house in April, and things like this had been happening routinely, without incident, until the first snowfall in early December. Going out to shovel the path to the mailbox, I noticed a large set of tracks in the snow, going across the lawn. Thinking that these things were from my resident bear friend, I decided to take a look. They weren't from a bear. From the tip of the longest toe to the heel, the tracks were about 1.5 feet long. The first clue that told me that they couldn't have come from a bear were the fact that they were made by some kind of biped. Bears can stand on two legs, but they can't go for prolonged periods walking this way. But even more obvious was the shape of the tracks. 3 toes with sharp claws on the tips. The middle toe was the longest. They reminded me of giant bird tracks. At this point, I was really starting to get confused. I checked the claw marks on the oak tree, and upon closer examination, there were only 3 scratch marks, not the 5 you would expect from a bear. I was beginning to wonder if this cranky old jackass had been right. Maybe there really were no bears. Maybe there was something else. I decided to take a picture of the tracks and do an image search on Google to see what I might find. The results Google gave me were all fossilized dinosaur tracks that had a very similar shape, many of which were roughly the same size. Looking closely at the links, I saw that one of them linked to a site for a place called Dinosaur State Park. I had heard of Dinosaur State Park before. In fact, I passed the sign for it on the highway twice every day on my way to work. I had never been there and I didn't really know what it was about, so I clicked the link. Turns out that Dinosaur State Park is the site of about 600 fossil dinosaur tracks that were uncovered in 1966, and is one of the largest dinosaur trackways in North America. The website also said that it was very common for people to uncover dinosaur tracks when they were doing construction in Connecticut. As a matter of fact, the Buckland Hills Mall in Manchester was built on hundreds of tracks. It is unknown exactly which dinosaurs made the footprints because no bones have ever been found in Connecticut. This is no coincidence. Apparently the conditions that are good for preserving footprints are the opposite for what's good for preserving bones. All they know is that it must have been a carnivore, about 20 feet long and weighing about 1,000 pounds, and would have lived here 200 million years ago. There's also some evidence to believe that it would have been a fish eater. The tracks I found in the snow were not fossils. They were remarkably fresh. At least they were before being blown away by the wind. They continued to pop up every once in a while after fresh snowfall. I still sometimes find scratch marks on the dirt in the spring, or my bird bath empty after a hot day in summer. And sometimes, when I go to take out the trash to the curb at night, if it's a quiet night with no cars going down the street, I sometimes think I can hear a faint, low breathing coming from somewhere in the darkened woods around my house. I think I might have come to the same realization that a lot of people in the neighborhood have. I think we're all pretty content to let it be, whatever it is. And it seems to believe the same thing. To say that it was here first would be a pretty big understatement. It does make you wonder though, what is it still doing here? It's not as if it has some unfinished business, right? Perhaps it's just really dedicated to the land. Or perhaps all of this is just nothing special, just a few odd observations, maybe embellished with some neighborhood pranksters. But I do believe that there is something here, even if I don't know what it is. Whatever it is, we at least seem to have a peaceful understanding. And it does make me appreciate the house a bit more than I used to.